That's about 5 o'clock. Check. All right. So today, I have a hard time seeing the chat in real time, and I realized because I had a higher than normal latency. So I actually lowered the latency, hopefully so that I can see the chat closer to when it actually shows up instead of a 30-second to 1 minute delay. The topic I'm doing today, if you've seen the thumbnail, is a topic that I'm quite certain has never been done in any stream in history. That is the historical sense. And no matter how much I try to get out of it, I can't ever help relating everything back to Baudrillard, Guy Debord, and today I'm bringing up a new person, Marshall McLuhan, the Sage of Toronto. Little bit of media studies day mixed with some other philosophy. I have some Nietzsche quotes prepared as well. But anyway, before that, what's up? Epoch Philosophy Gang. I think Epoch is streaming with my buddy tonight. I think I saw that. Gustro, you like my column of pills on the wall. I do have a column of pills. Derrida. No Derrida today. I don't think so. Yeah, so we're talking about history, a phenomenology of history, based on what's in phenomenology called an epoche. I don't know if Epoch Philosophy knew when he picked the name of his channel that Husserl used epoche as a basis for his phenomenology and a thought experiment, basically. But the horizon of meaning, which is what I'm calling the historical sense today, I'm claiming that history has been flattened. The epoche of meaning is the horizon of history, at least in a certain interpretation of it, which I'm arguing has been flattened by people who stream. So I am responsible for the collapse of meaning, the death of Western culture, and so on and so on. But you know, this is not the first time that someone used the medium against their own message. Way back in Plato, Phaedrus, Plato writes, or puts in Socrates' mouth at least, that you can't actually learn stuff from books. You can only learn stuff from a teacher, because the teacher has access to truth, whereas a book is only a copy of the teacher's teachings on truth. So in that sense, I'm returning to the Platonic ideal. But at the same time, I think streaming is bad. Though, it's better that you're here than watching Fortnite, if Fortnite is still a thing. Oh, Epoch is not streaming with Vic. It's a shame. About 15 minutes before, I don't have any ads for stuff except for this. About 15 minutes before I started this, I quickly uploaded a podcast that we recorded yesterday with the prolific Ben Burgess, where we talked about, of all things, Richard Dawkins' analytic philosophy. So if you want something to do after this, it was a pretty fun conversation. And I like to see the little pills beside people's names. That's pretty cool. Thanks for joining the channel, too. I should be better at expressing my gratitude, but unfortunately, I'm not very good at expressing anything at all, except for the notes that I've written down. So, to deconstruct my own activity in real time, history is flat, leveled out, and a large portion of that blame has to do not with the content of our media, but the form of our media, including live streaming. Live streaming is not the worst for it, though. The very worst thing you can ever do to your mind is have notifications on your phone. I'm convinced. This is the cause of the death of Western culture, is notifications on your phone. Firkin Tozan. Okay. So the historical sense, live, and liveness is opposed to any type of historical sense. This is why I've brought up this Baudrillard quote as my motto for at least the day, which I should probably read properly here. Our mythology is buttressed by all the more voracious demand for reality, for truth, for objectivity. Everywhere we find cinema verite, that means reality TV, live reporting, the news flash, the high-impact photo, the eyewitness report. Not sure when he wrote this, but it was certainly before live streaming was a thing. Around the time when he's also claiming that the Gulf War never happened, because the reality of the Gulf War was that it appeared on television as an event, more than an event that actually occurred. So I want to talk about Netflix. Go McLuhan on Netflix. And McLuhan, he's not very well known. He does have his moments of genius and also moments of really bad takes. So he doesn't get a full endorsement. He doesn't get 100% of a pass. He's known as the Sage of Toronto. And down at U of T, there's a building named after him. I think there's a street named after him also. And the Faculty of Information at U of T has the corny AF name iSchool. You know, the lowercase I school. And like, they didn't think that would date in 2 years. They probably named it after the iPod. But academics. This is academics, which I could just continue to rant about. Perennially behind the times. iSchool. My God. Imagine, like, this was probably the proposal of some 60-year-old dean that pitched the name to the 80-year-old board of U of T, the billionaires. And they're like, my grandkids use iPods. We should name a school after it. It'll increase enrollment if they have a name that they can relate to. Academia. That's why I make internet videos. Anyway, back to historical sense. So if there's something that's opposed to what I usually refer to as the postmodern condition, I have a pretty specific use when I use that in the content that I make. But the postmodern condition is opposed to the historical sense, which means that with the collapse of the historical sense, we're left with whatever the postmodern condition is. So the historical sense is like having a horizon of meaning that gives a special meaning or a particular meaning to history. And this is not universal history. This is not academic history. This is not the subject history necessarily. Probably includes those things. But even a history that involves totems or the mythology of your identity or your people or whatever it is. So in the Heideggerian sense of a disposition, thrownness, if you know the word thrownness, it's sort of the self-reflexivity of thrownness, that you recognize yourself as a creature that is subject to history, subject to time, and that this world appeared long before you did. And there have always been peoples without a historical sense. I'm arguing that we are a people without historical sense because we watch philosophy on live streams. But for example, the illiterate would not have the same historical sense that the literate would. And here's the beginnings of my McLuhan-esque point, is that you need not just writing, but a very advanced form of writing to be able to generate history, because it has to sit there unchanged in books. And that's what's able to keep history stable without changing over time, changing with retellings. And that's something that I don't think we have because we're, for all intents and purposes, illiterate, because who has time to read? There's too many interesting things required that don't require sitting down and being bored by a book. At least this is my thesis. I'll ask for some feedback when I've presented it if you disagree with me. So there's always been people without historical sense. I can name drop one more person if you like this line of reasoning, and it is Bernard Stiegler. Because for Stiegler, he says there's no human separate from technologies, ever. Every human, from the very first human that picked up a rock and used it as a hammer, that's what made humanity, and they've always been inseparable from their tools. You can't separate humans from tools. And one thing that defines modern man is the tool of writing, being able to produce these long texts, not just on the discipline of history, right, but even philosophy or books about the history of philosophy. Hegel's the one, of course, that comes to mind. Marx comes to mind. Because they are trying to sum up all of history self-reflexively from their point in history and saying all of this sort of led to us. And I think that's a foreign or an alien view that we don't really have anymore. So culture, this is a structuralist argument. Culture is created by myth primarily. It's also created by media, and what a society has access to expresses how they create culture, which is, everything opposed to nature in the old binary. So arts, laws, government, this kind of cultural distinction. I'm interrupted because, I got two of these. Thank you to Naphrodite. And now Thomas. Your videos on Lacan were formative as I was doing therapy while exiting Christian fundamentalism last year. And I'm not reading the rest of that. I'm glad you liked the Lacan video. Oh, I have something to show you before I get back to business. Did that show up? There. No, it didn't show up. I'll fade it in for dramatic effect. Lacan 1 is being remade because the sound sucked, but then also the rest of it sucked. And I think I said this last week that I was streaming. I didn't know. Yeah, I underestimated my audience. I didn't think that people would understand it, even as it was presented. But then watching it back, I'm like, this is actually it's not wrong. I will defend that it's not wrong, but it's too oversimplified to be considered good Lacan, which is why I got this up on my desk. Redoing a Cree. And the reason I got to redo that video is because it's my most viewed, and it's my only old video that people actually consistently watch. So I need it to go away. It's wrong. It's bad. It needs a touch up. It needs some animation. I animated it in Photoshop, which is really stupid. It's really stupid to do anything. Anyway, back to leveling. Historical sense, cultures created by myth, appeal to origin. So we have, even in the origin of the stories that a culture tells about itself. Yeah, destroy the past. I'm destroying my own history on YouTube. Unfortunately, it will never go away. So it'll probably be up in 2 weeks. I'm about a third of the way done redoing it, but fully redoing it. It's not like I'm using the same stuff. I'm rescripted, refilmed, everything. Destroying my past. Cultures are created out of myths, and myths are created out of media. So whether that's vocal history or oral history, whether it's written history or whether it's stream YouTube history, that's what it gets made out of. So giant turtles, family totems, family crests, the theogony of your culture's gods. In the United States, of course, the Constitution, which is held with a divine reverence. We can't change it, despite the fact that it's been changed, 30 times. I have no idea about American politics, by the way. But these all put you into a grand narrative. And if you know the first 5 words of postmodernism from Mr. Leotard, postmodernism represents the death of grand narratives. So there's not a single story that can incorporate all histories, which is kind of the exact opposite thing that philosophy was attempting to do in the previous century. So we are leveled. Our history is leveled. If you have a historical sense, you're able to pick out the details in your worldview about what things are important and what things matter and what things aren't important and what things don't matter. So if you are, this is the first example that comes to mind, but if you are a leftist, you're going to look at parts of history that matter as the things that Marx points to. The replacement of the bourgeois, or the replacement of the aristocracy by the bourgeoisie in Germany and England and France, mostly Germany and England first. Or you're going to look to the Paris Commune. You're going to look to workers' revolts and pick these out as the moments that weave together the history that you particularly care about. But in the postmodern condition, once the historical sense is attenuated, it is kind of stretched out so thin that all the peaks just become a flat line. And this is what is called leveling. And there's a philosopher who used the word leveling, and I'm going to guess it's Weber. Cheers. Canadian rye. I'm going to guess it was Weber. I could be wrong about that. So I've been talking really abstractly. Let's give you the perfect example. The president that you Americans deserved, Donald Trump, is historyless. He's a historyless subject. His brain is a television stream, and he has brought the entire electorate, the entire public, every late night host into his brain, which is just a TV screen. Ratings, live tweeting. He tweets just so that he can watch his tweets show up on TV, where Jake Tapper is going to freak out about it, saying, "Look at what awful thing Trump just tweeted." But this is his consciousness that has become the consciousness of America. Maybe that ends now. Maybe it doesn't. It's going to be now a demented amnesiac in charge, so maybe the memory just completely disappears. But Trump was one time asked what his favorite Bible verse was. And he says something like, well, I couldn't choose because I like all of them. Clearly, he couldn't even name a single one because that would require historical sense. His brain is a completely tuned in to only the present all the time. Like the most unimaginable thing would be for Trump to reference as meaningful something that happened even more than 20 years ago. That's impossible. He can't. He wouldn't be able to. He's a complete creature of the present. History is just flat. There's no meaning to be found there. Okay. checking the chat. Doesn't look like it's directed at this. Anyway. Yeah. Trump's being followed up by someone who doesn't even know what day of the week it is, let alone what happened 20 years ago. So I feel bad for you. I feel bad. Nothing I can do at all. Amnesia. But that's politics. I'm not trying to talk about politics today. Today I wanted to talk about Netflix, because you see an expression of this in both the form and the content of Netflix. I'm very personally, in my work, obsessed with the division between form and content, which is it informs my YouTube channel. Like, I'm never not aware that this is a YouTube channel. I'm aware of the media differences between like what producing a video is and doing a live stream is. And I always like to at least be aware of the fact that I'm subverting myself at the same time, because I could be doing a disservice. I don't know. By making people think they understand something that they might not because they haven't read it. But then the subversion of that as well is, how can you guarantee that even having read something that you've understood it? And that's the problem that Plato got to in the Phaedrus way back, like 300 BC. How do you know that you have understood it if you read it in a book? Because a book is dead. It's not activated by ideas. That's why you need a teacher. We don't really believe that now, because now we're struggling with the death of literacy. Anyway, Netflix, the thing that defines Netflix, destroyer of worlds, look on me, is first of all, this is my superficial critique that I'm gonna hopefully try to get a little bit more deep into. But everything's obviously a sequel, or it repurposes some old popular IP and repurposes it, and then they're able to get like guaranteed views by making remake shows. Remake of I saw Sabrina something is in the top 3, at least in Canadian Netflix. But basically, half of the top 10 is creative material that originated elsewhere. So the first thing is that everything's stuck on this loop of self-reference. And I don't need to go over this. There's like 28 Avengers movies that they reference each other. They reference each other, everything else that comes out. So the two interesting examples, because I'm talking about the historical sense today, is the Netflix shows, all the Netflix shows, which I haven't really seen. But you don't have to see things to be able to talk about them, right? But the shows about the British upper class. So Downton Abbey, The Crown, and the number 1 right now is Bridgerton, or something like that. And the other thing that's on this Netflix top 10 is all these documentary movies about musicians that are like 20 years old still. Shawn Mendes, Canadian. So he has that going for him. And I think that's probably it. Ariana Grande, Taylor Swift. They have documentaries made for them while they're still alive. And I'll tell you why I find that offensive. First of all, the incentive to put these out is that they already have fan bases. They have fan bases that are going to watch it, so of course they put it out. But this is not how you used to get a documentary made about you in the old world, in the world that used to have historical sense. To be memorialized in a documentary, first of all, you had to be interesting. And, jury is out whether Shawn Mendes is interesting. My guess is probably not. And the second is you had to be dead. You don't get a documentary made about you in the middle of your life, let alone the middle of your career. At least not in the old world. They marked significance. They're like, here was this person's contribution to humanity. It was so important that we had to make a documentary about it. And this is like fucking boomer talk. This is can rant on and on about, how the world used to be. But Ken Burns is like the most famous documentary maker. And the purpose that he gives to documentaries is explaining, marking the significance, giving the context, giving the lead up to whatever his documentary is about. Baseball. Here's where baseball started. Here's where it is today. I'm marking the significance of, America's game. But promoting a 22-year-old in the middle of their life, there's no sense of memorializing that. You're doing something in the middle that was done in the end. So that's my content critique of Netflix. That we can't tell the difference between what's meaningful and unmeaningful. Or if you could, it wouldn't matter because Netflix doesn't care. They don't have to. They shouldn't. But there's no hermeneutic here or interpretive view that understands time or the differences between times, the differences between cultures, the difference between events. So if we're in flat history, there are no events because nothing can actually happen that changes the future. Then you're in flat history, you're in circle history. One of Baudrillard's examples with this, the first Gulf War that he said never happened, is that events are explained before they even occur. So everything has already explanation, which is also the case whenever it comes to the main news talking about Trump supporters. They always have an explanation, and the explanation is, well, they're dumb hogs who are sexist and racist, so that's why they do the things they do. It's a pre-made, prefabricated, deplorable explanation for why they do what they do. So there's no interpretive burden placed on anybody because the news always tells you what to think the second something happens. Constantly live reporting, live YouTube streaming. And this is not, of course, just the news. This is anything that has a feed. YouTube feed. You probably saw this in your YouTube feed, and your lizard brain was like, oh, I'll watch that. It'll give me pleasure for a moment. And so you clicked on it. Twitter feed, Netflix feed. It's offering you immediately, always, what has no past. There is no past to the feed. It's only marching you into the future based on what other people are finding popular at exactly that moment. I want to add this to the Plastic Pills dictionary. We have feed brain, where everything is live. And this is the brain of Donald Trump that we all live in. Even non-Americans live in this brain because it dominates the Twitter feed. And then the news reports on the Twitter feed. Just constant feed brain. No historical sense. So there's no hermeneutic here, which is like a method of interpretation. You don't have a method of interpreting what's important from what's not important. Because if you had a hermeneutic, this pretend coup thing, you would know that that's not important. You would know that, there's no possible access that these people have to power, whether or not they desacralize your holy building, your holy temple of representative democracy in name only. You would know that that's not an important event. But we have to freak out. You have to freak out. That's what feed brain is all the time. And then the second thing, way back to Netflix, in addition to showing you this stuff, because it's trying to make me watch The Crown, is these historical shows. So I took a few notes on this. There's a little difference because whoever's making this show for you, Downton Abbey or Bridgerton, they're making it for you. This is not, and it's not meant to educate you, of course. But there's these tips of the cap, little winks at you with these characters, what they say, that they're telling you, look, I know I'm in a show, and this show is made for you. So they have like these the Victorian age aristocracy. Everything they do is 100% codified from birth to death based on your class position. You marry this person. Your concerns are with, propriety in court, appearing however you're supposed to appear, doing all the dances properly. And then the show makers of these shows have to give you a wink to be like, yo, you're watching TV. We know that you're watching TV. Look at how stupid things used to be. Look at how stupid this very silly codified culture is. Implying, of course, we're enlightened now. We don't have to follow these rules because we're enlightened people. So there's always a character in these shows that's the rebel, and they are, they're not going to fall in line into this Victorian regime of coded behavior. And that's supposed to be you. That's supposed to be the viewer thinking, oh yeah, if I lived at this time, I would be like... By the way, great historical show, my favorite historical show, Last Kingdom. And I was not paid to say that. It's just dope. Anyway. Oh, this new one, Bridgerton. There's like... I saw that there's in the soundtrack, they have pop songs put into, and then they're dancing around in their little twirly, waltzes. They're dancing to Ariana Grande. Second time I've mentioned Ariana Grande. There's another wink saying like, look at how we're with you here, observing this society that is way more, fucked up than we are, because they follow rules. We don't follow rules. And the whole ideology behind that is, of course, we do follow rules every day in every single one of our coded behaviors, but we need to look at this other culture as if from outside, as if they're alien, and they're doing something that we would never do. Hyper-codified. Finding my place in my notes. Give me a second here. Here's the other ideology of these old TV shows is we look at them as if they're completely codified. They have no class mobility. Whereas we believe the myth, any type of media that you engage with will sell you the myth that we are not striated socially the way that those people were. But we have this injunction, a command almost, to be entrepreneurial. You have to invent yourself. You have to be Elon Musk. You have to be Mark Zuckerberg. And that anyone can do that. So the ideology here is, look at them. They have no class mobility, not like us. But increasingly, people are waking up to the fact that that's completely untrue. You have to entrepreneurialize if you are going to have any shot at even a living income these days. You have to create yourself. You have to create your resume, do your volunteer work, do your YouTube channel. That's the only hope that you have for a certain kind of class mobility. So rich Victorians didn't have to do that. So it's also like we get a break watching them play their petty court games, where we don't have to play those games, but we have to play another extremely codified sort of game. So that's meant to give us the illusion of history, these shows, that you can never actually get access to. And it's not real either. It's a screen. Same thing with this reboot the 80s. Like Wonder Woman 2, I saw it. Just, why is it in 1984? There's not a single justification for that at all. It's just, no, we make movies about the 80s. Since Stranger Things was a hit, that's why movies are now in the 80s. So they can wear funny 80s clothes, or I don't know, bring them back. Everything is produced at the same level. There's no difference between these types of affect. Third example of lack of historical sense is the coup. The coup. The new 9/11. Why is it bad? They have no imagination. The only thing they can think of are the Nazis, which did not coup, by the way. They fail-couped, and then were elected and subsequently appointed. But it's Nazis taking over America is the narrative, because anything bad, there's just black and white. Things that are good are us. Things that are bad are Nazis. Because again, TV, Call of Duty, the only bad thing we can imagine that's consistently bad is Nazis. Why don't you bring up some of the examples of successful coups? There are 3 Napoleons and at least 3 coups between them. Why don't you bring that up? Because we have no historical sense. There's not enough movies made about Napoleon. That's probably the reason. History's flat, Nazis bad. Okay. Now we get to the theory bit. McLuhan knew this was going to happen. One of McLuhan's famous terms is secondary orality. So we have primary orality, oral meaning obviously your mouth. You could say oral, AU, referencing your ear, but orality, it references oral cultures that their primary means of communication were not writing. Now, to us, when we do history, the writing of every culture is the thing that you look at, because you can't hear people that are dead, obviously. So we interpret every culture to be literate, because if they weren't literate, we don't have their artifacts to read. We don't have their first person experience of what to read unless they wrote something down. So history requires not just writing, but long form writing in which you can record events, take down stories, and so on. And for McLuhan, the TV and YouTube streaming ushers in what's called secondary orality, which means we forget how to read because our primary media is non-literate, or at least it is a cold medium, which means it washes over all your senses at the same time, as opposed to reading, which is a hot medium and engages only your eyes and then your abstract thought by extension of that. And books are an extension of people, of humans. A book culture will appear very different from a YouTube culture, clearly. And I'm not saying that one's better. He was saying that one's better, I think. He wouldn't let his kids watch TV, or so the story goes, because he thought literate culture is better. When we say Western culture, it means, the writing and philosophy of Western culture. So, the humanities in general, not just philosophy, but the discipline of history, philosophy, studying philosophy is studying, Western philosophy at least, is studying 20 2,400 years of texts. It's just about reading. But reading novels or whatever was the story form before novels, like, I don't know, Dante's Inferno, gives you a sense of what that person was thinking, feeling, reflecting on when they were writing. So you're encountering an alien when you read something. It's not the same as playing Dante's Inferno on Xbox, which is not to encounter anything that you're not used to encountering. And this, again, is my problem with these historical TV shows, is they're made for you. So they have the appearance of learning, but you don't actually encounter anything alien because the showmakers the whole time are winking at you saying, hey, here's Ariana Grande in our waltz, in our court waltz. Same thing applies to Game of Thrones, which are good books, but they're good books written for you. Whereas if you read, I don't know, the history of the War of the Roses, whoever that was written for was not you. And what happens when you read something like that is you encounter the alien and you encounter the things that you don't get, that you can't get. And that makes you think. Just kind of McLuhan's point is that we can't think rationally anymore because we're watching TV all day. But when you encounter the alien, there's friction produced. So it's not about knowing what happened so much as reading the words of an alien. Something that you can't understand because it's not made for you. And that's the appeal of not just McLuhan, but McLuhan's teacher, whose name was Harold Innis, and he also has a building down at U of T. I look that way because it's that way. He's got a building called the Innis Building. And Innis wrote this book. Actually, it wasn't a book. It was a lecture in the 1940s. So this is not a YouTube problem. He wrote in the 40s a plea for time, which is saying we're losing our historical sense. And this is like before people had TVs in their house. He said we're losing our historical sense. Which means we're not interpreting our world through the world that created this world. We're not drawing causality between events. We have no historical sense that tells you what's important from what's less important. We don't have a hermeneutic to understand time and history, which was supposed to be what the university was for, right? And this was what Innis was saying was a big failure, is that the university becomes broken into disciplines. None has a sense of where even that discipline came from. If you get a science degree, it's unnecessary to learn about the history of science. So you don't get a sense that everything is historically grounded in this way, except, Innis argues, in the humanities, which is why even today most universities have these, you have to take a humanities course to graduate, but they never tell you why you have to take it. And this originally was the reason that you have liberal arts, is so that you have to take something that gives you an alien view. And, over time, we don't give a shit about that anymore. That's really what the challenge. The thing is, the challenge is, read something that you have to figure it out, which is what I'm calling friction here. Like if you're reading Dostoevsky, which is really good, by the way, but if you're reading Dostoevsky, just suddenly in the middle of the story, one of the characters has a different name all of a sudden, because Russians have apparently like 6 different names depending on who's speaking to them, whether it's their nickname, whether they're being addressed formally. And obviously Dostoevsky's not writing for you, so he doesn't explain that to you. But I don't know why suddenly, Mitya's name is different than it was 10 pages before. And that's kind of a stupid example because it doesn't really show the value of reading. But if you can get into the minds of characters like that and find out what they're thinking, they're not thinking the way that Trump's brain, which is all of our brain, the consciousness of Trump thinks. It's meant to serve as an obstacle. It serves to obstruct your thought, because by obstructing your thought, you actually get smarter, is the thesis here. But when you have a cold medium like television, like YouTube, that just washes over your senses, even if I say like a single thing that makes you think twice, then it's already on to the next thing. So you never actually get to spend time. And by the way, I'm not comparing myself to Dostoevsky, but that's the kind of idea, is that even if there's a bit that doesn't make sense, even if there's an obstruction, the next thing's already there, which is feed brain. You get the feed. If you don't want to think about a tweet, you don't have to, because the next tweet's coming up. If you don't want to watch a movie carefully on Netflix, it doesn't matter, because the next one's coming up. And when you don't have a sense of linearity, that's the collapse of history just into the media, which in this case is screen media. A book stops you. A book, if you don't get it, you can't go to the next page, because that sentence is sort of blocking your way. Because it's a hot medium, in McLuhan's sense, it stops you on that point because it's written linearly and it's dependent on you. It waits, the obstacle waits for you when you're reading something. So, always good to read. I don't expect anyone will begin to read just because I'm doing a stream on it. But it's an interesting thought to have when you're considering our historicity or lack thereof. I like it because it's imaginative and it's contrary to, the prevailing status quo. Yeah, someone said Neil Postman. Neil Postman, same thing. The TV just because it's constant. YouTube just because it's constant. Twitter, Netflix, because it's all constant. You never have to think. There's no point in waiting. So Guy Debord, author of Society of Spectacle, says this narrative history, or lack thereof, it's a very small spiraling narrative of history, destroys politics as well. So you can't really think politically unless you have a sense of history, because otherwise you're not going to know what's possible. That's kind of an obvious point. I'll put this quote up. Debord writes about Thucydides, obviously the Greek historian. Totality of events. Check it. History's domain was the memorable, the totality of events whose consequences would be lastingly apparent. And that's what an event is. An event is not just something that happens. It has cause and it has effect. And being able to interpret cause and effect is part of what makes an event an event. But in feed brain, all you have is pseudo events because there's no understanding or grip on their cause and effect. Thus, the Gulf War did not take place. And thus, inseparably, history was knowledge that should endure and aid in understanding, at least in part, what was to come. An everlasting possession, according to Thucydides, one of the very first historians. So for Debord, this is eradicated already. Society of Spectacle was 1960-something, maybe 1970. But already, way before we have internet, which just makes everything worse, every tendency worse, history's done. It's flat. There's no way to distinguish the noise from the significance anymore unless you have a hermeneutic that comes from outside of the media. So people that read, by the way, if this is correct, people that read have a better sense of what's important versus what's not important than people who don't, than people whose only inculcation with information comes from Netflix and Twitter all day, every day. And we all know those types. An eternity of noisy insignificance. Sad. Anyway, this deluge, if the Bohr thesis is right, it's destroyed politics. And he says, quote, in Greece, history and democracy entered the world at the same time. We can prove that their disappearances have also been simultaneous. We don't have a democracy because we don't understand what democracy is, because we live in an eternal present, or a present that has no significance given to the past. And I always am just referencing Baudrillard and de Boer. I can't get out of it. It's hard to find other things interesting when they were so right about the world today 40 years ago. I did get some Nietzsche. It was like over 100 years ago. So, when Jake Tapper stops talking about something for 3 days, he forgets that it ever happened. So there's my one quote. I'll give you one more quotation, which is the Nietzsche man. Nietzsche, in a book, I think it's actually part of a different book, but it's called, I have it in a book form, which is called The Advantage and Disadvantage of History for Life. It's also called The Use and Abuse of History for Life. Nietzsche. My final quotation. History belongs to the preserving and revering of the soul. By tending with loving hands what has long survived, one intends to preserve the conditions in which he grew up for those that come after him, and so he serves life. Now, Nietzsche in this book, I wish I could tell you, because it's in a bigger book. I think it's Untimely Meditations. I don't know. Maybe someone in the chat can look it up and tell everyone. Called The Advantage and Disadvantage of History for Life. But there's 3 kinds of history in here. I don't remember all of them. One is like really academic history. Academic history is just knowing the past for the sake of knowing it. And for Nietzsche, this is cold and useless because all you're doing is memorizing facts. So that's not what I'm speaking of when I say the historical sense, because knowing facts doesn't do anything. This is for Baudrillard, what he calls museumification. It's why do we have to preserve Ramses, the mummy, in our museum? We can't let him stay in Egypt because he might get damaged. We can't let him stay in Egypt. We have to bring him to, I don't know where he is, the Louvre or the Smithsonian or whatever. We have to take Ramses away because he might get damaged, and we can't let him be damaged because he's old. Now, for Baudrillard, this is a symptom of our anxiety about death, so we have to just give old things meaning because we're not going anywhere. But for Nietzsche, this is like also a pathetic, desperate attempt just to keep the past for the past's sake. Whereas in this book, Advantage and Disadvantage, Nietzsche says the only purpose, this quote that I put up here, quotation, sorry, I always say quote as if it's not a verb. Quotation is the noun. History belongs to the preserving and revering of the soul. By tending with loving hands what has long survived, one intends to preserve the conditions in which he grew up for those that will come after him, and so serves life. So you decide that the past is important because of the stuff that it does for you in life, not death. The point of history is not keeping around dead stuff or learning dead facts just for the sake of knowing facts. The purpose of it is to inform life, culture, art, and all the other things that Nietzsche likes. Dancing. One of my favorite Nietzsche quotes is, there is nothing that a philosopher would prefer to be than a good dancer. Anyway, who cares about history? The right is the one with all the rhetoric of history. And, Western values and preventing, the second invasion of the Moors or whatever. Like onward Christian soldiers, the Moors took our Europe already once. You hear that guy in Hungary talk like this all the time. We have to build a fence. Orban, I think his name is. Got to build a fence because the immigrants are coming back. They're coming back from the last time the Turks invaded. I don't even know when that was. I'm not even going to guess. History, the facts of history are not my strong suit. Okay. I know quite a bit about the history of ideas, but not when each invasion happened. But he uses this rhetoric to inspire, the feelings that we're losing our civilization. And the other right-wing YouTube people do this too with their whole Jerusalem and Athens thing. Like the feminists are trying to destroy Jerusalem and Athens that has given us this beautiful, perfect democracy that could not be improved because of how perfect it is. So we got to stop the social justice warriors from taking over campus because we need to preserve our Christian heritage. Onward Christian soldiers. This is pure folklore. This is folk mythology. But it does invoke the historical sense, and you can see that it also produces meaning because people believe that. Like, oh shit, I'm not just an alienated subject that is sitting in my mom's basement and upset because the only job I can get is minimum wage. Actually, I'm a covert Christian soldier that needs to defend Western civilization from the immigrants and the feminists. That's my purpose. That's powerful. You have a purpose. This Nietzsche quote can be used for the bad and the good too. I don't have to sit on Instagram all day and post about my meaningless life because I'm a Christian soldier, or Judeo-Christian soldier. I guess we don't want to exclude Ben Shapito. So, I have a strict mantra that I never tell people what to do or what to think. So I don't know what's good and bad. I am absolved of the question because I am a YouTuber. So what's good and what's bad about that? I don't know. We seem kind of dumb, and if we're gonna buy the media argument, that's part of the reason that we're dumb. Feeds, having feed brain. The historical sense, rest in peace. And you can see that I'm demonstrably struggling with how to give advice about this. Like, read Hegel's Logic. There you'll face an obstruction. You'll be forced to struggle with the text, and everyone will be better for it. The first 5 pages of the Logic are the best part as well. How about this? Read Pascal's Pensées, because they are all the length of a tweet anyway. So there won't be any struggle there. This is tweeting from the 17th century. Wait, one sec. I want to actually. I'm gonna put up a tweet, a Pascal tweet. I got this one highlighted, and it actually fits perfectly. He says, the greater intellect one has, the more originality one finds in men. Ordinary persons find no difference between men, humans. So remember how everything bad is Nazis. That shows a lack of intellect. And more importantly, it shows a lack of imagination. Because, I mean, I don't even have to point out all the differences between Cowman and, I don't know, General Ludendorff, the beer hall pooch. The Cowman is not the new General Ludendorff. I'm sorry to say. But this is what the historical sense gives you. It gives you the ability to step back from just constant information, which is exhausting. So, and because it's exhausting, you need the explanation to be prepackaged with the information that's being given you. So, like, CNN is an ideological state apparatus in the sense that it's just moralist. It tells you what's right and wrong, how to think, as does the rest of this stuff. And the idea is, if this is right, if this thesis of Stiegler mashed up with McLuhan, mashed up with Innes, mashed up with Nietzsche, if my thesis here is right, then thinking is a better way than reacting. There's a quote from McLuhan who says the power of literacy, the power of Western man, he uses, of course, man, but it's not it's gender neutral. The power of Western man is to think without reacting. And when we enter a stage of secondary orality with the TV and radio, that's what goes away. Now we can only react. We're compelled to react or just disappear into the morass, wash, dissipation of history and time. True. Okay. Yeah, I'm done. But I'll stay on stream a bit. I haven't talked to anybody. Got Jamie Lannister in the chat. By the way, I'm writing my next video. It's on depression. It's a theme video. Depression as seen through the works of Julia Kristeva. Mark Fisher will make I'll reference him. I feel like Mark Fisher's overrated in terms of YouTube content for the amount of thinking he did, but Julia Kristeva and Byung-Chul Han on the Burnout Society, which is the topic that my patrons actually chose, but I didn't want to do one on just a single book. So I made it about depression, and his thought is that kind of what related to what we're talking about here is there's so much information that I don't want to mischaracterize the argument, but there's so much information and so much demand that never resists, that depression is a form of mental exhaustion. Someone says Byung-Chul Han is really overrated, and I have read 2 of his books now, and I don't know that he's overrated because I never heard of him, but they're good intros and they're good resistance-less theory, easy theory. Mark Fisher was extremely online. He had a blog thing, I think, going on. Someone wrote something about Stiegler up here. Oh, where to start with Stiegler? It's got to be Technics and Time. It's really, that's an easy book, I think, if I'm remembering it correctly. There's Technics and Time, and there's 3 of them. I think I only read 2 of them. But all the stuff that I just mentioned about, like, there's no human without technics, and technics is both the tools and the ways that the tools are put to use. There is no person, no human being, without its technics. It's an emergent creature, or they have a symbiotic relationship. But yeah, Technics and Time, easy. I heard about this Jordan Peterson guy. He seems pretty interesting, and I like his way of speaking. You're not alone. You're not alone. I don't know if this is a joke. The new Fisher book is good. Is there a new one, like, remade from his notes or something? Or is it about him? Have you read Japanese Marxist and Friend of Zizek and Jameson? No, I have not. I do. I don't know where I inherited this idea from, but I have this idea, and I won't defend it because I think it might be wrong. But my personal brain philosophy is that I only read primary sources, except in some cases. But I almost only read primary sources, and then not new books until I've been sufficiently recommended it by friends and people like that says, no, this is a good book you got to read. I don't really read books that are about someone else unless they're interpretive in kind of the way that, like, Deleuze would interpret Nietzsche or Leibniz or, canonical works. And I'm not saying that's a good way, but you can get, maybe this is my personal problem, you can get pretty biased towards how to read a certain text if you don't read the text first. And I guess it's the benefit of having a lot of years in school for myself that I can pretty much read anything given enough time. So I'm not good at recommending secondary sources or new books either, because I don't read new books unless, of course, they've been out for a while. Stiegler. Oh, people asking about Stiegler. I can't. Primary pills. I like that. I can't. I could open up my notes, but I don't want to just talk about Stiegler today. I like this streaming method, right? I like this medium as opposed to a video, because a video, I'm spending tons of time not teaching because I also want the video to be a production, to have these cinematic elements to it. But this is pure down to whatever's in my brain at the time can come out. So Stiegler, I'll probably ask the channel members or or patrons to pick stream topics if I keep going with this. Yeah. I don't want to say it's a weekly stream because then I have to commit to it. But it's been 2 weeks in a row, so we're off to a start. Hey, what's up, Matt? 1,000 years of nonlinear history. Is that Stiegler? James got some love for the School of Life. Don't worry, I know you don't mean it. School of Life. What a grift. You can buy some fucking mouse pads from School of Life. Where's the pills mouse pads, huh? Oh, Manuel de Landa. Yeah, there you go. I read only one of de Landa's books. It's on my shelf, but I can't read the spine from here. Delusion. How did you choose plastic pills as your name? I did a video on that. It's called What is Plastic Pills and How I Chose My Name. I'm wondering if there's any reactions to like this thesis that I just spent a whole bunch of time writing down, finding references for, presenting, or am I just like off base here? I don't usually give advice, but I can give the advice of you got to have at least a day in the week where there's not a single notification on your phone and you leave it in a different room so you can read books properly. Do you think I'll do a video on Hegel? I probably won't do a video on Hegel. Because it's too hard to read. I mean that as mostly a joke, but if I did a video on Hegel, I'd have to get my buddy to write it for me. Because I can't spend the time required to understand the encyclopedia. Plus, also, my interpretation of Hegel is biased by Adorno, Foucault, and Deleuze. So I usually keep my mouth shut about it because the popular thing now, Zizek probably started this, is the leftist Hegel. Most Hegelians are not leftist. In my anecdotal experience, most of them are like Alan Bloom, Straussian Hegelians. So I have spent most of my time dismissing the right-wing Hegel without knowing primary source, the left-wing Hegel. Though Hegel was, in many senses, a socially progressive individual personally, and whether or not that is the best application of his philosophy, I do not know. But if you know anything about me, it's not what you know, it's how interesting it's said. And Hegel's boring when I could be reading 1,000 Plateaus for the third time. Hegel or Deleuze, which is harder to read? It depends on which Deleuze book, for sure. Deleuze actually writes pretty clearly in his monographs. The early ones, most especially. But I think when he gets with Guattari, you know, gives him drugs, maybe. The difference in repetition is not a difficult book, I don't think, in my opinion. Harold Bloom is an interesting read for literature and historicization. So definitely. And Harold Bloom, if you don't know who Harold Bloom is, he's a literary critic. The book that I read from him was The Invention of the Human, and it was about Shakespeare. Shakespeare invented the human. He's a He's a Shakespeare scholar, died recently, I think in the last couple of years. But he gives real damn good interpretations of Shakespeare. Shakespeare's an example that I didn't bring up at all today, and it's good for English readers too, especially considering the impact and effects that Shakespeare had on the English language itself. But you're not taught how to read this properly in high school or secondary school, but it's the moments that you find in Shakespeare where something doesn't make sense that there's the most to be found. This is what I'm talking about in terms of obstruction. But I guess the style of like having a play is sort of like this cold medium that McLuhan describes. It's easy just to let it disappear. When if you want to read Shakespeare carefully, then those are the moments that can like actually change your view on something. You change your view on yourself, and Hamlet's just fucking one of the greatest things you could ever read, in my opinion. Hegel dry as hell. Hell yeah. Right Hegelians. Hegel's fun if you make it fun. I totally agree with you, but like every encyclopedia book, to start that, I mean, there's so many things that I haven't read, and I've already read Hegel's Logic. So I'm already a third down the encyclopedia. Am I going to finish the rest of it? I think I can just die. Maybe that would be a good thing to go to secondary source for. If I don't really care about getting a primary experience of it. If you guys are young, if you're starting out your undergrad careers, I can recommend that you read Hegel, but I'm too old. Too old. What other fiction authors do you like? I read new fiction that's like, I guess, decent. I'm not going to vouch. Like Game of Thrones, The Expanse books I read recently, and they're just made to be turned into a TV show. They weren't even meant to be read. So you might as well just wait till the TV shows come out. But in terms of fiction, I gotta say it's Dostoevsky, and I know that's a friggin' basic answer, but no old ass book do you read that is as good as Dostoevsky. For like, I thought everybody was stupid back then. No, it's genius. Don DeLillo, really like Don DeLillo. What's the Airborne Toxic event? Is that book? I think I read it, like I finished it, closed it, and then read it again because it was so good. Joyce, I can't read it. I can't read Ulysses. I think I read some of his short stuff, but Ulysses, I can't do it. Actually, I never finished War and Peace, but War and Peace was very accessible too. Tolstoy. I just found it like a little too, I don't know. I wasn't not doing anything with my life, so reading War and Peace is a chore, but there's no part of it that's like really that difficult. Got halfway through it. White Noise. Oh, White Noise. That's the Airborne Toxic event book. Yeah. Also a band. Man, I don't know what my opinion of David Foster Wallace is supposed to be, but like it's so good. He's just a good writer. But there's all takes on David Foster Wallace, like you're not supposed to like him, or I don't actually know what the takes are. But I don't know how you could argue that he's not just really fucking good at writing. All right, am I into poetry? I'm too dumb to be into poetry. I like when Heidegger writes about poetry, but it's not like if I were given a poem, I would have any capacity to be like, oh, this is a good poem or this is a bad poem. Rilke, I try to read it with like the German version next to the English version. I kind of see why that's good, but I am like the worst person at reading poetry. Worst also at knowing what's good music. I think those things have to do with each other in that they're both like the opposite of very visual. I'm very visual, which is why I've always chosen painting as my preferred medium. Looking at painting and doing painting and studying painting. I don't know if you can actually though like read poetry in translation at least properly. Like Rilke, I can see what's happening there, but it's not like I can see like what the words look like in German, but I have almost no sense of the German language whatsoever. Oh, whatever. I like what this Kafuzum. I'm not sure if I've read another writer besides David Foster Wallace who can really make me feel like I can't breathe after a 4-paragraph sentence that truly makes me feel like humankind is done. Right? This is why I don't know what the mockery of David Foster Wallace is about, but the potency of words. Like everyone knows the potency of words if you're reading something like Shakespeare. Like you read one of the soliloquies or whatever, and you get it. Even the poems, like the sonnets, you kind of get it with Shakespeare. But also you don't know how much is historical distance, how much is him just being creative with language or inventing language. So it's easy to have awe for that. And specifically David Foster Wallace, whatever he's writing about, and I guess this is fucking corny to say, but that I get that sense of weight in words from him specifically. DeLillo too. You can tell that they've like carefully constructed sentences. I don't know why this has turned into a literature stream when I don't know like about about literature. Philip K. Dick, read all of his books pretty much. His writing really sucks compared to the other two though, except for the content. He's a content, not a form writer. Whereas I think DeLillo and Foster Wallace are form writers. It doesn't matter what they're writing about. Writing about like tennis, you could read David Foster Wallace. The Bible. I would like an elaboration on how David Foster Wallace fans ruin David Foster Wallace. I don't know how that is. Is it just people like saying that he's the best? Do they talk about it too much? Borges. William Gibson. I never finished Neuromancer. I think I have it on my e-reader, but anyway, why are you guys doing this instead of watching someone play Minecraft? I got to get to my Minecraft game tonight. That's a joke. I haven't read Borges. I just read all the philosophers paraphrasing Borges. Contemporary painter? Do contemporary painters exist? What music do you like? I don't I told you I don't know actually anything about music. I don't even want to embarrass myself by like saying the basic answer to it. I'm a Spotify playlist kind of person. You tell me what to listen to. I'll put in like I don't know, The National, and then it will just give me a nice folky mix to listen to. It's fine. Oh, here's a good question. Do I dig the philosophy of music? We have a Discord, and we talk about there. Like everyone in there is a musician for whatever reason. Probably some of them are in the chat here now. But I, as a visual person, first of all, visual in the sense that I like, interpret, see art, make videos. That's kind of where it's my strongest sense. It's probably vision. But vision aligns in this media sense. This should actually be its own stream. This could be the next stream. It aligns with this abstract, formal, identity-based philosophy that is about substances, clearly defined substances that exist in moments in time, which is Western metaphysics, right? So I think someone who has also like the sort of brain structure that I do for whatever reason, probably accidental, why I have an easier time than other people with philosophy concepts. Whereas there's a whole different type of thought and a whole different type of phenomenology that we could call audio-based or audible interpretation. Because audio sound is entirely about time. It's about, a flow, more of what a Deleuze would call it in terms of like a process philosophy, as opposed to a philosophy that's based on identity, concept, and form, which is kind of the philosophy that I get. But at the same time, I kind of hate that I get that, because I see more of the value in the other Bergsonian midst of time experience where things are not things. Like, there's no objects in your other sense. There's no objects in smelling, and there's no objects in music. They are patterns. And I think that if we're going to get into metaphysics here, reality is far more about patterns and not at all about objects. So the fact that Western civilization, this big abstraction, is so beholden to eyesight, from Plato, by the way, from Plato, Aristotle, they're all visual metaphors. Aristotle literally says that the eyesight is chief among the senses. Plato's metaphor of the cave, what it's about, vision. The cave is dark. Dark means ignorance. Sun means truth. So Western metaphysics is totally beholden to visual people, basically. And I really would like some. I couldn't do this, but it would be great for someone to make a sort of Deleuzian sonic metaphysics of flows. Be like Whitehead's feelings metaphysics. But anyway, yeah, I can't do that. Be great if somebody did. I'd read the shit out of that. Anonymous Botch, you mentioned Martin J., who's a philosopher descendant of the Frankfurt School. Martin J., what did he write? He wrote a book on what he called ocular centrism, which is a little bit what I'm referencing now, an obsession with just for example, the word enlightenment. We say Dark Ages versus enlightenment. So the Dark Ages, people didn't know anything. Enlightenment, people learned, or they had their shadows cast out of their brain because they saw the light. This is a completely visual metaphor about what it means to be intelligent, which is only based on vision. There's no like sonic intelligence. There's no audible intelligence because it's always based on this dark light metaphor. So, interesting thesis. Some of you guys are funny. All right. Anyway, good stream. If you're watching this back, cool. Thanks. Not everybody's live. I'll probably do it again next week. Bataille is sick, bro. I haven't read Bataille in a while. I think that's going to be my video within the next couple months, because got to do that stuff. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. It's been fun. And yeah, if you missed it, then watch the replay. It's mostly a lecture anyway, because I can't go on here and just talk, because it gives me too much social anxiety. So coming with notes works for me. Thanks for coming too. I know there's like other stuff you can do on Friday night, and maybe there's not COVID and all that, but it was cool to talk to you guys. And yeah, I like this because it keeps the channel active, except for the once a month that I can actually put out a video, but feels like I'm still engaged with it. So I will be back in not too long. Probably 7 days. But again, I can't promise anything, because being beholden to time is too historically minded for me.